What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Destination the Show. This is episode 64. It is Wednesday, January 14th, 2025. My name is Jamie Cameron, joined as always by Jeremy Nygaard. Jeremy, hello, sir. How are
Hey,
you?
I'm good. I'm sitting in the comforts of my own basement.
Hmm, sounds
How are, how
nice.
are, how are you?
I'm not well, Jeremy. First of all, as you know, talking to you is already pushing me to the very limits of my patience, and then combine that with being out of town, that makes me additionally that adds additional layers of grumpiness and tiredness.
Yep.
And so
Orneriness. Don't forget about that one.
yeah, and I'm on East Coast time, so it's late, but here we are ready to chop it up about baseball. Such is my dedication to having a weekly conversation with you. But if we want to look on the bright side, it is significantly warmer in PA than it is in western Wisconsin / southeast
It's
Minnesota.
true.
So I can't complain.
Yeah. Wind chills for sure all over the place. And you're probably looking at 20-ish, right?
Yep,
And we're negative regular and then, negative 20 real feel. So
that's rough.
yeah, but you know what? That's what we get for choosing to live here, not being able to travel to the East Coast once a month.
This is true. This is true. Well, Jeremy, you know what was, in the spirit of me being out of town, we're going to try and keep it a little bit briefer. So we made like a last minute pivot in our running order. We were going to do a dueling Brewers top 10 prospect lists today, but we want to do that. It's like due diligence, and I want to be in the mood to debate with you.
Yep.
And right now, I'm not in the mood to debate with you. I don't have time for your games this
Fair.
evening. So,
Totally fair.
so instead, what we're going to do is we're going to do kind of a mailbag slash news roundup slash. There's some interesting international updates that I think we should talk through, and we've got some things that are tangential to the Cubs and Twins, especially. And then I think we'll come back and hit the top 10 prospect lists starting next week hard, starting with the Brewers. And
Okay.
I'm excited for that one, especially because I feel like we're going to have some disagreements.
Well, we normally do,
We normally do.
but we'll have extras.
So why don't we start digging into these topics? There's a decent amount of news, which is exciting, ranging from like interesting to you know, big news. And so let's start. We'll keep it low wattage to start. Cubs made a signing in the last week since we spoke last, inking pitcher Colin Reed to a 1-year, $5 million deal. We talked. It was either last week, Jeremy, or the week before about the Cubs' aggression so far this offseason, getting that star upside in Kyle Tucker, and the thought and the idea that they really need to kick on from now on and go for it. So my question to you, now that they signed Ree, who's projected to be like a 1-win guy, do you think the Cubs still have a big move in the works to bolster their rotation, or is this it?
I think
What's it?
I think they hope to have a big move, right? And so when you want to do things like that, but you also need to operate under the assumption that you're not going to be able to pull that off. So you add like serviceable depth, which is what this move is, because we've talked
Yeah.
a ton about it, like 5 starting pitchers, 5-man rotation. Maybe you get by with a 4-man rotation early in the season,
Mm-hmm.
but over the course of a season, you're looking at 8 or 9 guys that have to fit into that. And if you can add I'm not going to say an established veteran, but an established person that fits into that somehow, I think there's value there. And so
Yeah.
teams are always looking to make value additions, but in the Cubs from the Cubs perspective this offseason, they also have to look at making that big move because they've put the pieces together to compete. And so I think they're going to be there. It sounds like they're out on Sasaki. So I think at this point, it's more like okay, now let's pivot to see what else is available, probably in the trade market. And they still have
Mm-hmm.
plenty of ammunition if that's the route they want to go.
So I'm glad you brought up Sasaki because that's a nice segue to what I want to talk about next, which is digging into him a little bit more. And before we talk about the finalists for him, because Paston tweeted those out a couple of evenings ago, I do want to talk about the Cubs and their sad claim to be fourth place in the running for Sasaki. Do you think, Jeremy, given their need for some real let's put it this way, their need for a playoff caliber starter at the top of their rotation, do you think there's a solid argument to be made that the Cubs were, in fact, the team most in need of Roki Sasaki when we think about the finalists, the other three being the Dodgers, the Padres, and the Blue Jays?
I don't necessarily think so, because I don't think I'm convinced that Roki Sasaki is going to be that guy this year, right? I think he's going to eventually be a front of the line starter. I eventually feel like he's going to be a top 10 arm in all of baseball, but he's still young, right? And it took Ohtani some time to adjust, and you see that, like Paul Skeens. What Paul Skeens did at his age was unbelievable, and so yeah, I mean, if you add Sasaki to a team this year, you can't just plug him in the number one spot.
For sure.
And so I think even if he signed with the Cubs, they still would be looking at a bigger move. And like Pablo Lopez's name has come up. And I don't necessarily know that that's the name, but I do think that there could be a move. We've talked about the Mariners, right?
Yep.
And so would it have been huge for the Cubs to make that deal? Absolutely. But I don't know that he's going to be everything right away that people want him to be. And that's okay. He's still young. There's going to be an adjustment period, and maybe he's real quick to make that. But I do think that this is more of a 2 or 3 or 4 year down the line before it's super, super impactful. But at the end of the day, I mean, he's going to be a guy that you could plug into a rotation at the back end. I also think that there's going to be an adjustment to him pitching every 5 days. And is the team willing to do that immediately? Or are we going to see a team say, you're pitching every Monday, or you're pitching every Tuesday, or you're just going to pitch once a week, and we'll adjust around there? And you can't just ignore the fact that for a long time, pretty prominent names have said, does he want to pitch in the biggest markets? Does he want to? Is he going to? But I mean, that's something that we'll find out, I think, very, very quickly.
Very, very quickly. Quick sidebar. I have seen some disrespectful trade proposition packages for Pablo Lopez in the last 3 weeks online, and I am just here to say it's extremely annoying.
Yeah, he'll net a very good haul if the Twins decide to trade him, which I don't believe they will.
Agreed on both counts. So let's talk a little bit more about the finalists for Sasaki, because I do think that's interesting. One of them is not like the other. I'm talking about, of course, the Blue Jays, who we have gently poked fun at, and I think hold some affection for the Blue Jays in general on this show, right? As a team who seems to have a willingness to spend struggles like the Giants do in the NL to get guys to take their free agent dollars. The Blue Jays do not have a stellar record of developing pitching. A lot of their high-profile prospects, Ricky Tiedemann, Brandon Barriera, who was a 22 draft guy, have had fairly significant injuries. And so I guess my question, Jeremy, is do you see the Blue Jays as an odd fit? And do you differentiate at all between a team's track record developing prospects and the success they might have been able to accomplish with a guy in the big leagues? Because Sasaki presumably is, as you say, starting out the back end of a rotation as opposed to starting out in the minor leagues.
Yeah, I actually like that they're included. And for me, and it's this is all just how I feel, right? I think it's them or the Dodgers. And maybe it comes out to be the Padres, and I'll be wrong.
I'll take the Padres.
Okay. I get the sense that when you have a team so much unlike the others, there's a draw there. And I think he could be huge in Toronto. And I think the East is it's different because you don't typically see this recently where Japanese guys come and sign with an East Coast team. So I like the idea. I also like it from the selfish perspective of I would watch Toronto games that start at 6:00 versus being older and stand up to watch games at 9 because I'm in a fantasy baseball league that I took Roki Sasaki I think like 5 years ago when he like kind of burst on the scene, and I want to see how this works. So would I look at developing? I wouldn't. I mean, because the examples that you gave for the Blue Jays, I could tell you Dustin May is very similar for the Dodgers, sure. Right? And so for every development success, you're going to have a guy that it's like, man, he fizzled out because of injuries. So they are kind of the Blue Jays are kind of a surprise, but I like their inclusion, and that's the team that I'm pulling for. You know, we've talked off air about the Dodgers. You think it's terrible that it's going to happen. I think it's fine.
I want to like distinguish between and make sure that you're not misquoting me.
It's terrible for baseball was your quote.
It's nice. That's not what I said. That's absolutely not what I said. I didn't say it was terrible for baseball. I just think it's boring. Okay. I like, it's fine. Like, it is great for LA fans that they are the team and the ownership group and the front office and the think tank that has managed to combine beautifully resources and player development and domestic scouting and international scouting and all of the things in a wonderful bouquet of baseball perfection. But that's boring. I just want a little more equity in terms of talent and how it's spread around. That's all.
You didn't say it was terrible. You did say, and I quote, him signing with the Dodgers. I do not see that as a positive for baseball.
Fair.
Is what you said.
I agree.
And I say, hey, the bill's going to come due sometime.
But do you know why? So I think there is a thing for me of like why Sasaki disproportionately feels like an annoyance going to the Dodgers. And here's what it is. I think I can put my finger on it. Sasaki is a very unique and rare talent and situation, right? Where you have, like, if you look at an industry source like Fangraphs, they have a board and they've ranked all the international prospects. And all of these guys, they're like future value. The best guys in the class is like a 45, which is a below league average player. Sasaki's like a 60, which like you just like never ever see on an international board. And so like exactly. So the rarity of that asset is one thing, but then you also say combined with the rarity of this amazing asset, everyone has a shot in terms of some of the typical barriers for entry being removed here, right? Like this is not a free agent commanding $350 million, which automatically rules out 20 teams from the running. This is someone who, at least hypothetically, every team should be able to have a conversation with and make a pitch to. And so I think for me, that's what amplifies the frustration of the Dodgers potentially being the ones that get him, because they tap into the other advantages over the rest of the 29 orgs.
Sure. But if I'm Roki Sasaki and I look at the collection of teams that I could potentially sign with, and I see Shohei Ohtani on a roster.
Yeah, right.
And Yoshi Yamamoto on a roster. Why wouldn't I sign with them? Like, what's going to be the best thing for me? And as a 23-year-old Japanese person to go play with the greatest Japanese, arguably the greatest baseball player of all time, and a 26-year-old who also is like this is I think maybe we're all overthinking it.
Yep.
If I'm
Maybe.
thinking about going to a Japanese baseball league and I see Mike Trout on a roster and I see Bryce Harper on a roster, I'm going to be like, why would I think about signing with any of these other teams that are full of Japanese players?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go sign with those and be teammates with those guys. Like that, right? That at its simplest form, that just makes way too much sense.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, I feel you. I feel you. You know what? As you say, it's likely that we're gonna get an answer here in the coming days, and so it sounds like you get two teams in the Sasaki sweepstakes. You get the Jays and Dodgers. I get the Padres, and we will reconvene this time next week and see who's right.
Theo gets the field.
Theo gets the field.
Let's go. All right.
Okay, let's move on to some tangential Sasaki related news. We should just call this episode the Roki Show. And this is like relatively new Twins news, which I'm excited. This never happens, Jeremy. It never happens that there is news that happens that lines up with the timing of our podcast. So I'm excited about it. We talked about a few weeks ago the possibility that teams clearing space for Roki is going to impact their current agreements with international free agent prospects. And the Twins have actually flipped one of the Dodgers' fairly major prospects as of yesterday, I believe. So his name's Taylor Serrano. He's a switch hitting infielder, outfielder out of the Dominican Republic, reported to have recently transitioned from shortstop to the outfield. Top 75 bonus guy, so that would put him somewhere very loosely in the like $600,000 to $800,000 range. And Baseball America, they do a great job with their international free agent board. They rank players by bonus as opposed to talent, because that's just an exercise in futility. And they have him as kind of an up arrow guy, meaning he's kind of popped or gone through a little bit of a positive development spurt in recent months. So that puts the Twins now at 5 prospects to be signed in national signing window. Opens tomorrow with top 100 bonuses, which is a pretty robust class. So your thoughts, Jeremy, on them being able to flip a prospect from the Dodgers? How exciting or not exciting is that for you?
Yeah, so the Twins have been active on not necessarily the flipping front, but active on the things are going to be impacted by Roki Sasaki.
Mm-hmm.
Or let me take that back. Active on the when things change because of Japanese sensations available front. So if you think back to the Ohtani news, they traded international money to, I believe, the Angels and got Jacob Pearson.
Yep.
And they also traded money to a different team and got a different prospect. And so they've taken advantage of kind of what's happening. And in this case, if they find themselves with extra money and potentially had saved some money thinking, hey, Sasaki, why not us? And so, from the perspective of somebody's going to sign him and there's going to be players that are available, and then you start working that, right? So right now there's 3 finalists, which means there's a lot of international free agents in limbo: Dodgers, Blue Jays, and Padres. And so you start reaching out and saying, hey, you don't want to be left when the music stops without a chair.
Yep.
I know your offer might have been for $1 million, but it could be 0. And here we have, $750,000 ready for you if you're willing to flip. I don't know what Serrano's agreement was previously, but that's a thing they've taken advantage of. And even with Severino, right? He wasn't available. He signed with the Braves. There was some, rules broken. He hits free agency. Boom. The Twins pounce. So they've been good about taking advantage of the market. Now the chances of Taylor Serrano being a Major League Baseball player, low.
Yep.
right? But being able to get someone that's higher regarded than other people at a very young age, good for the Twins, and you like to see them thinking creatively, right? Because we're so accustomed to signing relief pitchers that are injured for minor league free agent deals.
Yep.
Jumping on non-tendered guys and signing them. This is a good thing that they've done. Might it work out? Maybe. Might it not? Also maybe. But at least fun that there's positive news for the Twins, because there's really not been.
For sure. And let's put it this way, because, I mean, you bring up a good point. Is he likely to make it to the majors? No, of course not. But let's put it this way, because we're in list season. We're in prospect list season. And Baseball Prospectus released their 101 today, I believe. 23 of their 101 were international free agent signees, right?
Absolutely.
And so you're talking about what, like 20 to 25% of top 100 prospects at one time were a 16-year-old, 17-year-old kid from DR, Venezuela, wherever, who has been signed and developed by an organization. And so the more bites of the apple you can get, and the Twins now have 5 of the top 100 bonus guys, that seems like a good thing for an organization that's relying on drafting and development.
Right. And this could lead to a whole new discussion about, do you want to take 5 big bites at the apple? Or do you want to throw 60,000 at 60 guys, right? And have 2 Dominican teams, because now there's a lot of nibbles at the apple with the chance to develop. And that's a whole different strategy that we can talk about later. But what it is on the surface is the Twins are adding another. If there was an international draft pick, they just added, or an international draft, they just added a top 3-round pick for the price of nothing, right?
Yep. Like that. Excited by that. It just shows also what a slow and boring winter it's been, that is like the big news. Speaking of low wattage moves, we have good segues today. Speaking of low wattage moves, the Twins also made a trade, Jeremy, acquiring former top prospect from the Dodgers, who they like to do business with, catcher Diego Cartaya. This is a guy who is 23 years old, was a former consensus top 20 global prospect in baseball. I believe he was a 2020. I'm not sure of the year. Say again?
2022 Futures game.
There you go. 2022 Futures game. Absolutely crushed in the low minors, right? So looking at his 2022 season, he beat up a 142 WRC plus in low A, followed it up with a 138 WRC plus in high A. Just had an absolutely outstanding season. 389 on base, 503 slug. Then he hit an absolute wall when he got to the upper levels of the minors. 2023, his first stab at AA, 71 WRC plus, repeated the beginning of last year. Did decently upon a return to AA, 111 WRC plus, and cratered at AAA, just a 60 WRC plus, walking 9% of the time, striking out 27.4% of the time, just really, really, really struggled to hit. And so I'm curious, Jeremy, what you make of this. Let's start like really globally, big picture, still relatively young at 23 years old. Do you think there is anything here for the Twins to tap into?
Well, I mean,
is there a prospect left here, or is he?
Sure. Oh yeah,
post prospect.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's kind of the thing. If there was solid prospect, you're not getting him for next to nothing, right? But at the same time, if you have the opportunity to add a guy that's 2 years removed from being a top 20 prospect for nothing, you take it. And he's a catcher. So the value isn't always necessarily tied up in the bat for a catcher. I don't know that the reports of his defense are great.
Fringy average, I think we can call it.
Right.
45, 50.
But at least worth a look. Like, he's at least worth a look. And so the one thing, and I've said this repeatedly, this is not going to come as news to you. I always look at walks to strikeouts, right? And so in 2022, he struck out twice as much as he walked, hit 22 home runs, had a 900, almost 900 OPS at A ball. And then comes the big jump where it's like at Double A, how are these guys going to do? But it's Double A at 21 years old. And so that's where I'm willing to roll the dice and see. You're out nothing if this doesn't work.
Fair.
And the we've seen guys have terrible years and bounce back. And so I think there's positive value in making trade. Do the Twins get to rewrite their catching plans because they've added him? Absolutely not. But we've seen really good catching prospects turn into nothings. We've seen non-prospects become solid regulars. Mm-hmm. And so that's the one position where I look less at quality and more at quantity, and just hoping you find one that can stick, because unless you have Adley Rutschman or the top tier Joe Mauers, you just have to get by with serviceable players. And I think Jeffers right now is good enough that they can steal a few more years from him. But adding another option in Diego Cartaya, I think is a good deal. Even though the probability of success is probably what, 30%?
Less
than 30?
I would go 5.
Okay, somewhere between 5 and 30.
If you have a strong opinion, weigh in. But I just I don't know.
So yeah, you are. Yeah, Theo called you a hater, and I think it's the Allentown water. But start him in Double A, right? Start him in Double A. I think there's going to be a time this year where people are like, he's back.
Do you know what, Jeremy? Nothing would make my heart gladder than having that happen. And you know what? I will say this.
There are things that would make your heart gladder.
Being home would be one of them. The Twins do an outstanding job with, I think, with what you might call under the radar guys, and a tease for answering a question, which we got later. In particular, guys that are like undrafted free agent types. I'm thinking like Peyton Eels, Carson McCusker, like so many great examples there. And so maybe they can work some magic with Cartaya, and agree with you that it's certainly interesting and worth a shot. Last thing on him, just to make sure that we check this box. Does acquiring him make a trade of Christian Vasquez or Ryan Jeffers any more likely for the Twins?
No. I think they're trying to move Vasquez as it is. I would be very surprised if they move Jeffers.
Agreed.
I think that it's the exact same if you would have asked me that a week ago before they had him. But it's depth. And you can't have, like I say, you can't have a pitching depth. Catching is another thing where it's like, I think it makes it, because he's on the 40-man. Yes. I could see it may be more likely that
with one option year remaining, I believe,
which is fine. But I think Camargo would be more likely to try to be squeezed off the 40-man and pass through waivers if they need his spot than if they didn't have him. And so it makes softening that blow if they lose him a little bit less. Because right now I believe they have 5 catcher, or as people like to say, catcher adjacent players on their roster.
Sure. And I do think that speaks to you, right? Like the Twins don't necessarily have a very clear succession plan at catcher. Like if you look through their minor league system, what do you see the strength being? It's middle infielders and right-handed college pitching. Those are the things that they draft a lot of, and catching. They don't necessarily need to have one, but they sure don't. Okay, two more things I want to hit, and then we'll knock out some questions here. So this is more of a note, Jeremy, rather than a like discussion point. But thought it was interesting that the Twins made some staffing changes, promotions, etc. They hired former Twin and fan favorite Ira Adrianza as an assistant of player development, which I thought was interesting. And the other staff update that I want to share is a congrats and a shout out to guest of the show, Sean Johnson, who's been promoted to assistant general manager. How about
Yeah,
that?
that's super cool. Yeah, super cool. Sean's done a lot. I mean, you can go back to a article I did with him on Twins Daily like a dozen years ago.
Yep.
Just being willing to share and kind of pull back the curtains a little bit, not too much, but a little bit. And he's been in pursued by other organizations a number of times. Really worked his way up the ranks. I think this is just a sign of appreciation that the Twins are throwing him where it's like it's probably not going to be a huge change in responsibilities, but the check will probably have start with a different number.
Right.
And so super cool for him. He's not going to change at all. Like the guy that you've seen when he interviews with Doogie, this guy you've heard when he's been on with us, he's going to be the same guy.
Yep.
But you as an organization and as the Twins organization specifically, like when you recognize those people and you want to keep those people around, you do right by them. And so super cool. I sent him a text and congratulated him. He thanked me. And so I think it's awesome. As far as Adrianza, I feel like when he played, there was talk about how his future was going to be in a front office.
For sure.
And so, again, recognizing that as an organization and then bringing that in, my guess is that he's not going to spend a ton of time in the Twins front office. Someone will poach him. But it's really just giving back to your players and saying, hey, we recognize that you had this skill. Let's give you a start. And then go do big things elsewhere in the league. And so, again, that's a really cool deal. And I think that the Twins have always done a really good job taking care of their players, former players, when they want to go, have a post-playing career in sports, whether that's in the broadcast booth or, front office opportunities or in dugouts or just being around minor league guys. And so you can add Adrianza to a long list of former Twins that continue to be involved with the organization. I personally think that's awesome.
Yep. Agreed. 100%. Congrats to Sean. Let's talk, Jeremy, Twins, ZiPS, which I'm sure you won't be able to see. So we talked about the Cubs projections last week on our episode. I want to say it was last week, and we talked about like how incredibly robust and aggressive their projections were. Some of the best, just the best like offensive projections in baseball, basically, and it was buoyed by guys who had like really strong defensive projections like Pete Crow Armstrong and Nico Warner and those types of guys. I want to dig into some of the finer points of the Twins projections, and I'm gonna spit out some takeaways at you because you haven't read through this yet, right? You haven't like read this.
Not only have I not read that, but under in the relievers, does that say Castellano?
Yeah, Castellano. What's his name? The Phillies acquisition from the Rule 5 draft.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Perfect. So I'm going to give you some of the headlines, I guess, from the article, and I want to get your reactions to like, does this surprise you? Does this not surprise you? Does this make you mad? What do you think? Okay.
Yep.
All right. Here's the first one. So that bullpen projection, that is projected to be not one of, but the very best bullpen in baseball, even a hair better than the Cleveland Guardians. What do you think?
So when you put that up, and I'm not BSing you here. When you put that up, and I'm like, I immediately was like, okay, look at the relieving, like Duran, Jack, Sands, Alcala, Tonkin, Stewart. I'm like, God, if healthy, that could be a phenomenal bullpen. And then I got to, the next wave of three, And I'm like, well, questions there. Who's that guy? Was one of them. And then I'm like, but Varland, Paddock, Hedrick provide length too. And so for me, that was like, that doesn't shock me at all. I do think there's that potential, but I also think they're one injury away from being average. They're 2 injuries away from being a complete disaster.
Mm-hmm.
And that scares me a little bit. But
like
yeah,
you're saying like a lot of that value is locked up in Duran and Jax and a hopefully healthy Brock Stewart. Is that right?
correct. But Alcala is a huge question in that as well. And it's like, is Cole Sands really the guy? Because I mean, you can look. I was a huge doubter of Cole Sands, and I've left the tweets up, the receipts. But he's been so good, and so like yeah. But Brock Stewart is kind of like the pivot point there, where it's like if Brock Stewart provides nothing, oof.
Yeah.
But if Brock Stewart is peak Brock Stewart, yeah, that bullpen is arguably the best bullpen in the major leagues.
Yep. Sidebar before we move on, talk about the rotation quick. Someone find Jeremy's Twitter receipts about Cole Sands, about Jeremy dragging Cole Sands, please, so that we can put him on blast. Okay, here's your second takeaway, Jeremy. So that rotation, right? You've got the. I think I guess we haven't talked about this really explicitly so far this offseason. The Twins rotation is really good. That is projected to be somewhere between the 6th and 10th best rotation in baseball. So, one, your reaction to that, and then two, how do you see things shaking out when you've got Paddock in there, Zebby, Festa? Like, what do you think the kind of orientation of the back end of that rotation is if we fast forward to spring training, assuming no injuries, which is very silly, but it's a fun thought exercise.
I think you have to assume that 1/5 of the rotation is not going to be healthy coming out of spring training. And not even necessarily healthy, but like game ready, right? Where it's like, oh, we're behind. I mean, it's like clockwork. You get to the 3rd week and it's like so-and-so's a couple weeks behind. They're not going to be ready to go. Sonny Gray, right? Wasn't that a Sonny Gray thing in his last year?
I don't remember.
Lopez is a clear-cut number 1. Ober is the clear-cut like 2+. Like he's a dog for me. Joe Ryan is one of, if not the best number 3 in baseball when he's right. And that's, there's some rotations that are just kind of stupid, but like as far as number 3 pitchers go, which is what he is, he's so good. After that, like if I had to guess, David Festa has to be in the rotation.
I agree.
And then I fully believe that Simeon Woods Richardson has to be the number 5.
I also think it's not fair to assume that Simeon Woods Richardson is going to put up the same level of production that he did in 2024. In fact, I think it would be probably smart to assume a little bit of regression there at least.
Yeah. And that's why you have a guy like Zeb Matthews ready. You have other prospect guys ready. As long as Varland has options left, which I believe he has one left.
I think so.
Keep starting him. If there's not a need in the bullpen, keep starting him. Paddock, I'm a little the opposite of, right? Just make him a reliever, and I think he could thrive. But I do think that when it shakes out and we're penciling in the opening day, assuming all guys are on track, it's going to be Lopez over Ryan, Festa, SWR.
Okay, here's my last ZiPS thing that I want to talk about with you, right? And it is around the offense, the lineup. This is the portion of it that I found frustrating because if we look through, there's bright spots, right? You've got Buxton Castro combo in center field, 3.7, Correa, 4.3. Big health question marks there in my opinion, but we'll we'll put that to the side. Solid catching tandem, looking good in right field. Second base, I want to put to the side for a second. Literally in the projection, it says DH, bunch of dudes. Does not list players because who knows who that is going to be. First base, you've got a projection of 1.8 from a combination of Miranda, Eddie Julian, and Luke Keeschel, who we won't talk about now because we got a specific question about him. And then left field, 1.1 from Larnach Castro and or Austin Martin. And so I guess my thought reading that, Jeremy, and looking at that was, oh, this is so frustrating because these problems feel very fixable. All you need is a good, solid bat. It doesn't even really matter where they play. And that led me into a rabbit hole of, could Emmanuel Rodriguez be a really important part of the Twins' offense this season, potentially, assuming he has a solid, healthy, productive 6 weeks in St. Paul to start the season?
I mean, he certainly could. But I also feel like when you look at those, to think that that's like Willie Castro, wherever he fits in, like is given zero value, right? Like,
I don't think so. I think it's more that value is significantly spread between multiple positions, and we could look at his individual projection.
But there's not, like 3.7 is going to be mostly Buxton.
No, it's not though, because Buxton's going to play 90 games. So I don't think that's quite right.
I feel like the way that their names are, bigger to smaller, right? Like Willie Castro's value is going to come in the fact that he's playing all of these different positions, including second base and left field, and you're a 2.6 WAR combined. Castro's going to provide that. Like Lee, Julian, and Larnach, they're going to provide something as well. And I think that's the thing. Like Eddie Julian's kind of been written off.
Mm-hmm.
Is that fair? I don't know that that's fair.
I don't know that that's fair, but I think it's fair that there's a number of guys who, if you rewind to like the middle of last season when things were going well, who you would have said, yep, he's like a fundamental everyday player, like part of the core, part of the future, who now we're saying, wait, how good is this guy, right? Whether that's like a guy like Brooks Lee, who just probably hasn't had enough playing time, or Miranda and Julian have been like super hot and cold and we're not sure what they are.
Yep. So when's the next WBC? Because as soon as that happens, Eddie Julian's going to be part of the next.
I actually have no idea.
2027, Theo says, so that's a while. The bunch of dudes at DH, that's exactly how the Twins handle this, though, where they rotate guys through it, staying out of the field for a day.
I feel you. I'm just saying my frustration lies in that is a $6 million investment to get a guy that has like a 118, 120 WRC plus, who hits 25 home runs, who's like CJ Crone from 5 years ago in the DH, as opposed to nobody.
But you're not going to assume a guy that's not on the roster. Right. And so there's going to be guys in February and March that are available, and the Twins are going to be like, oh, that's bargain bin shopping, because they do that so well. Yep. And so that changes things. You know, Carlos Santana, has he signed with anybody yet?
Yeah, Cleveland.
Oh yeah, he's going back to
back with the Guardians for $10 million. They traded Josh Naylor.
But guys like that,
yeah,
right, where you find a dude like Josh Bell just signed, right, a little bit ago.
Yep.
You're going to find like guys that can be penciled in the lineup 80% of the time, that provide positive value, and the Twins will sign there. I would be very, very surprised if the names that are listed on that board right now are all the names that go into spring training. You know what I mean? And so obviously Donovan Solano's not going to be that name because he just signed, I saw. But I think you add another name there. You also don't know what Luke Keeschel is going to be. I would be kind of surprised if Brooks Lee was the opening day second baseman. I think there's still work to be done there.
Yeah.
And so it wouldn't surprise me at all, like you said. But there's guys out there, and it's like, yep, and it's January 14th, and so I think there's work to be done, and there's work that's going to happen. There's just got to be dominoes that fall before we get to the point where it's like, okay, yep, we're set in stone. Look at the Twins opening day roster over the last handful of years. Like, if you looked at the last guy added and average those dates out, I bet you
I'm sure it's
significantly later than what
I'm sure it's
we would guess.
That's fair. Twins projected as of right now to be in the range of 85 to 88 wins, pending any additional moves. So something we can monitor. And I guess, yeah, my frustration
that's high.
I agree. And my frustration just stems from like no one in the AL Central has done anything this offseason. Cleveland have made some interesting moves, but a lot of it was actually about clearing payroll. Like they got rid of Jimenez at second base, traded him to the Jays. They got rid of Naylor, sent him to Arizona, and then signed Santana as a 1-year bridge to what's the guy's name who they acquired from the Rays? I forget. Okay, let's move on. We're gonna finish. That's a remarkable way. I'm gonna read that comment from Theo real quick. That's super interesting. Michael Wacha re-signing with the Royals has been the most amount of money spent on one player in the AL Central this offseason. Terrible. Disgraceful. Yeah. That's disgraceful.
It's a crawl, and the Twins are still in it.
It's a crawl. Okay. $51 million for 3 years. That's kind of sad. Okay, let's go through some questions, Jeremy. We got some really good ones. These are Twins related and Twins specific. So let's start. These all came from Blue Sky, I want to say. So first, David's cool. David's like the archivist for the Midwest League. And so he's always posting like lineup cards from the Colonels from like, 2004, and it's like Mara Morneau in it, and interesting content. So here's the question.
Wait.
I realized halfway through that I was misappropriating their affiliate at the time, right? Who would that be? Beloit?
The Beloit.
Yeah, okay, there you go. But I was hoping you would just let me roll with it because I
never missed the opportunity to correct the error ever.
Okay, here we go. Here's David's question. So I think he's based in Cedar Rapids. So he says, who will we see in Cedar Rapids this year, and how long will they stay? Any notable prospects that you think are worth highlighting that are going to spend time in Cedar Rapids? I think that's going to end up be a fun roster in 2025, actually.
Yeah. Draft picks from last year, they drafted a number of college guys, which I think that makes a whole lot of sense. I know like Kyle DeBarge, when he was drafted, was not maybe a name that a guy that we both liked, but not necessarily a name that's high on prospect lists. Mm-hmm. I could see him kind of running through that league quickly. So that to me is a big one. And there's so many guys that, if they get through Fort Myers, that they make it there later in the year. Kellen Culpepper, obviously, as a former first round pick last year, who wasn't great in Cedar Rapids, if I'm recalling that correctly.
Right. I think it was just worn down, honestly.
Yeah. So you're playing a full college season,
right?
You're transitioning to wood bats in late in the year, trying to get acclimated to professional life. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities for guys, and you can run through some names, but it's going to be a lot of the college picks.
Yeah.
Pitchers are a little bit harder to peg, but I think there's the opportunity that there'll be some exciting names on that list as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I would double down on all the college position player draftees from 24. So Kalen Culpepper probably will start out there. I think you'll get Billy Amick and Kyle DeBarge before too long. Kadeem Jow is a guy you talked about last week. Jaime Ferrer is a hitter I like a ton, who the Twins took in the 4th round out of Florida State. So here's my 2 questions for you. And these are, I think they're kind of like pick'ems as to where a guy starts. So I guess we'll each take a side here. Does Charlie Soto start in Cedar Rapids?
Probably, and I don't know that I would have answered it that way a handful of years ago, where the Twins tended to keep their guys out of the cold, but it seems like they've been a little bit more aggressive. So I will say, like 60-40, yes.
Okay.
At this point.
Like that. Okay, then how about this one? And the reason I mentioned both of these, these guys I think are intriguing. One, because they're the kind of like the guys that excite you, the prep draftees, and two, because I think it's fair to say for both that there's some kind of warts to their performance from 2024, which is what you would expect from young drafted out of high school prospects. So the other guy, put percentages on for me, Brandon Winokur, is he going to start at Cedar Rapids?
Yeah, I'd say probably 80% on him.
Okay.
Maybe even a touch higher. Like he spent the whole year at Fort Myers, which I think came as a little bit of a surprise. I mean, obviously 115 strikeouts to 34 walks, but what he did, 14 home runs, like
he was really hot at the end of the season too. His August was
yeah.
absolutely outrageous.
So I think it's just like, yeah, we're gonna move him forward. So I would say probably 85-ish% yes, 15% no, and the 15% would have more to do with like if there's any hiccups in spring training where it's just like, let's get you right before we send you to what is colder weather. But I don't see it being like, okay, you're just not gonna play, and then we're gonna send you to Fort Myers and start your season. I would be relatively surprised if he wasn't at Cedar Rapids.
Okay. Then we need to dig in more on a guy because he came up in the ZiPS projections, and Corey also sent a question on this prospect. I think he was top 40, top 45 on BP's 101, which was released today. And the Twins really skew towards like impact guys on that list, which I think you would take over just volume, or I would anyway. How much time do you think Luke Keeschel is going to need at AAA? Could he be a first base option for the Twins long term? So let's split Keeschel up a little bit and pick this apart. Where do you think he starts? He was doing real well in AA before his season ended early with kind of a scheduled Tommy John surgery. By all reports that we've heard, he should be good to go coming into spring training 2025. Where do you think he starts?
I think he starts in Wichita. 58 games there last year. So started the year at Cedar Rapids and played 44 games with a 1,001 OPS. Went to Wichita, 58 games, 832 OPS. Like, I feel like there's some unfinished business potentially. If you start him at AAA, coming off of a relatively major surgery, and it doesn't go well, I feel like you could lose the whole 2025 season. So start him in Wichita where he was good but not great, and have him try to, have some success there. And in my mind, like, that target is probably 30-ish games, right? Like maybe 35, like playing
mid-May.
Yeah, playing six weeks, and getting him back. And then once we start playing every day, when there's a need and you have guys going down, then at that point, St. Paul. But in the interim, you would have more depth, more like 4A depth at St. Paul, because you don't want to push those guys out. You want to have some of those people built in for depth. So I would guess kind of that 30 to 35 game range, and then AAA. But at any point in time, he's certainly a viable candidate to be brought up to play any number of positions. And there's so much value and in that depth. And so, like, as Willie Castro approaches the end of his tenure, Luke Keeschel becomes that guy in 2026. Could he be part of that mix in 2025? He certainly could be.
Yeah, I like that answer a lot. I think to directly answer about first base, like, yeah, but he's too good an athlete for you to say this is a first baseman. Like he's a really like the twin. One of the reasons the Twins drafted him was they loved his like athleticism. They're really bullish that he can stick on the dirt somewhere. I think second base is best. But one of the challenges before he had surgery last year was his throwing arm was really impacted by this injury. So they were interested in trying him in center field, couldn't really throw well. So he spent a lot of time DHing. And so I think that will be part of the reason that they don't super rush him is you want to give him reps at second. You probably want to give him reps in center field. And we know the
I wouldn't do
Twins.
either of those things.
Yeah.
This year.
You would not?
No, I might play him exclusively at first base because there's so much value in his bat. And I don't want to rush him back. I think the reason they played him everywhere.
I don't think he'll play the field if he's not ready to throw, though.
But he can play first base. You can't put a guy in center field. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they just DH him. But I mean, if you look at since he was drafted, he's played 13 games at first, 44 games at second, 2 games at third, 20 games at center.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you want to stay off him as much as possible. And maybe that's the thing. Like in those first 30 games, he's just exclusively a first baseman. That buys another 6 weeks. But it's just hard because you don't want to screw that arm up. And the Twins will be conservative because I think they do value him a lot. Like I feel like they value him as much as Walker Jenkins, right?
Hey, that's a I'm gonna pause the dramatic effect there. No, but I agree with you that they are super, super high on Keishel. And I think like so he's interesting, right? Because he doesn't have one thing which like really, really pops. He was the most voted for player in the recent MLB executive poll for most underrated prospect in baseball, with responses from all 30 orgs. So that'll give you an idea.
Do you think the Twins realize that?
I think they're super bullish on him. They raved about him before the draft, right? And we've talked about this so much about how he was.
I'm not saying his trade value is the same as Walker Jenkins. I'm saying for them to move either of those guys, they would have to be absolutely freaking blown away.
Yeah.
And that they're not going to do it. Like they're not untouchable because nobody's untouchable, but as close to untouchable as anybody that they have. And obviously Walker Jenkins is rated higher, but when you're that close to the majors, you're not giving that up. So I think they're going to be super cautious. They don't want to do anything that might, hamper that. And good for him. Like, dude was so good last year, and it was super fun. And part of it that I'm enjoying, that you probably are enjoying more, is you were super high on him.
I was.
Before the Twins drafted him. So I think that kind of adds to it too, where you're like, this is the guy, and you're beating down the table.
Yep.
And then they draft him, and then he's that good, and you're like, see, look at me, Prospects Live, just baseball, whatever you're doing now. I don't even know what it is. You know what I mean? Like that's a big deal.
Yep. Okay, one more, and you can like plead the fifth on this one because I just added this one on before we came on, but I thought it was a fun question. And you can also tell me to go first because I had some guys in mind. So Cody from Twins Daily, who's the Twins prospect most likely to have a Zebby Matthews-like breakout in 2025? And he then clarified, right? I don't think anyone is expecting a pitcher to go from high A to like the majors, but like take that Zebby Matthews like 2024 to mean see multiple levels of the minors progress through multiple levels. So do you want to plead the fifth, or do you want me to go first, or do you have a guy?
No, well, I'm going to default to my answer to all pitching questions. Right? Connor Prelip is going to debut for the Twins at some point in 2025. He's not going to start. I mean, he probably starts in AA and then AAA. Like he's just going to have this meteoric rise through the league, and he's going to have thrown all of, what is he throwing, 30 minor league innings. He's going to like debut after throwing 60 minor league innings. And
your only dream in life is for Connor Prelip's arm to be healthy in 2025. I feel like I'm
a simple dude.
It's so close to the top of the list.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a great answer. Can't argue with that. I'll give you 2 under the radar guys. One, Jonas Levin highlighted when he was on with us about a month and a half ago. And so I want to bring him back up because we talked a little bit earlier about how good the Twins are identifying undrafted talent. So Ricky Castro is the name. He's an older prospect, 25 years old, right-handed pitcher, undrafted out of Tulane. Spent time at Fort Myers and Cedar Rapids in 2024 and just has really, really explosive stuff. They spent time in the back half of the year working on his arsenal, getting a little bit more distinct in his breaking ball shapes between his slider and his curveball, all of that good stuff. I think they think there's still some more left in the tank in terms of like how well he moves, and he already throws really hard. So he's one I would point out who did not walk a lot of guys, struck out a lot of guys, and throws really hard.
Mhm.
And then the other guy, this is way off the radar, but I think he's a really fun one, and that is Jack Doherty. He is a 23 draftee. I'm gonna mess up the round. It's 8th or 9th, I want to say, out of Ole Miss, and he came out of nowhere onto my radar last spring because the Twins player development account was posting montages from like the dusty outfields of the Twins complex, and he was just blowing like 97 past dudes on the backfields, and I was like, who is this guy? And then he went down for the entire year with shoulder surgery for a shoulder impingement, and so he didn't pitch in the minors last year. I think he's 23 years old. He'll likely, I'm guessing, start at Fort Myers this year so he can be at the complex. But he's a guy who the reports on the stuff is just like really nasty, really high velocity, has a good chance to move well, and has time to make up from last year. So those would be the 2 picks. 9th rounder in 2023.
Yeah. Yep. 9th rounder in 2023. Pitched in the SEC. So I mean there's been experience there. Yeah, that when I saw that, I'm like, yep, that's a good call. Struck out 162 and 129 collegiate innings and only walked 45.
Yep. He has a chance to be a good one. Okay, let's wrap it up there for today. Our short episode turned into the typical hour, so go us. Quick housekeeping before we roll out of here. You can find all of our stuff on Twitter at DTS_pod1, on Blue Sky at Destination the Show. YouTube channel is at Destination the Show, and you can email, tweet us, direct message us, abuse or questions. The email address is destinationtheshow@gmail.com, all one word. We appreciate anything that you can do to support the show and help us grow. And Jeremy, just a little tease, we are getting towards me constantly nagging you to start talking about the draft because it's the new year. So
it's that time.
It's that time. We should be back next week to dig into the Brewers' top 10 prospects. Until then, hope you get the outcome that you are rooting for in the Roki Stakes. See you guys next week.